Sarah gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. The tension in her hands mirrored the turmoil in her heart. She had been driving for hours, the road stretching endlessly before her, a path to an uncertain future. Every mile brought her closer to the old farmhouse, yet further from the life she once knew. The old farmhouse loomed ahead, a shadow against the grey sky. It stood there, weathered and worn, much like Sarah's spirit. The fog clung to the ground, wrapping the house in a shroud of mystery and melancholy. This place, with its creaking floors and draughty windows, was to be their new home. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to heal. The promise of new beginnings had brought them here to this secluded corner of the countryside. Sarah had hoped that the change of scenery would help them leave behind the shadows of their past, to find solace in the simplicity of rural life. She had brought her 3 children, 10-year-old Emily, 8-year-old Ethan, and little Lily, only 5, to this quiet corner of the countryside. Each child carried their own memories and grief, their young hearts heavy with the loss of their father. Sarah watched them, her heart aching with the weight of her own sorrow and the responsibility of guiding them through this difficult time. But the pain of their father's recent passing lingered, a heavy weight on Sarah's heart. Every corner of their old life was filled with his presence, and now every moment was a reminder of his absence. She felt the burden of being both mother and father, protector and provider, a role she had never imagined she would have to fill alone.
She glanced at her children in the rearview mirror, their faces etched with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Emily, the eldest, tried to put on a brave face, but Sarah could see the fear in her eyes. Ethan, usually so full of energy, sat quietly, lost in his thoughts. Little Lily clutched her teddy bear, her innocent eyes wide with uncertainty. They too felt the absence of their father keenly. His laughter, his comforting presence, the way he made everything seem all right, all of it was gone. The car ride was silent, each of them lost in their own memories and fears. The countryside rolled by, a blur of green and grey, as they approached their new home. This move, she hoped, would bring them some peace. Sarah knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to create a new life for her family. She hoped that the tranquility of the countryside, the fresh air, and the open spaces would help them heal. As they drove through the winding roads, she whispered a silent promise to herself, to be strong for her children, to find joy in the little things, and to keep the memory of their father alive in their hearts.
The house was old, its bones creaking like an ancient beast. Ivy crawled up its walls like long, grasping fingers. The garden was overgrown, weeds twisting around the rusted swing set. As Sarah parked the car and turned off the engine, an unsettling silence fell over them. The wind seemed to hold its breath, and the only sound was the faint rustling of leaves.
The children were quiet, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. Even under the pale light of the afternoon sun, the house had an eerie, almost sinister air about it.
The first few days were the hardest. The silence of the house was broken only by the sounds of their unpacking and the children's hesitant whispers. Each box they opened seemed to release a new wave of memories, both joyful and sorrowful. The children, Emily and Ethan, found solace in each other's company, their whispers a mix of curiosity and trepidation as they explored their new yet old surroundings. At night, the floorboards creaked, each groan of the old house sending shivers down their spines. The house seemed to come alive in the darkness, its age-old secrets whispering through the creaks and groans. The wind outside added to the eerie symphony, howling through the cracks and making the old windows rattle. It was as if the house was trying to communicate with them, sharing stories of its past inhabitants. Then there were the whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to drift from the empty rooms. These whispers were not just sounds, they carried a weight, a sense of history and mystery. The family often found themselves pausing, straining their ears to catch a word or a phrase, but the whispers remained elusive, always just out of reach. It was as if the house was filled with invisible guests, each with their own story to tell.
Emily was the first to hear them. She described them as sounding like children giggling, their laughter echoing through the darkened hallways. The giggles were playful yet haunting, a stark contrast to the otherwise somber atmosphere of the house. Emily would often cover her ears, trying to block out the eerie sounds, but the giggles seemed to seep through, wrapping around her like a cold embrace. She would lie awake at night, her heart pounding, wondering if the giggles were real or just a figment of her imagination.
Ethan, never one to be left out, claimed to have seen fleeting shadows dancing at the edge of his vision. These shadows were not just tricks of the light. They had a presence, a life of their own. Ethan would often find himself staring into the darkness, trying to catch a glimpse of these elusive figures. The shadows seemed to move with a purpose, as if they were aware of his gaze. He would call out to them, but they never responded, always slipping away just as he thought he could see them clearly. The house, with its whispers and giggles, had become a place of endless mystery and intrigue for the children.
Sarah tried to be strong, to be the pillar of comfort her children needed. She dismissed the whispers and shadows as figments of their imagination, the product of their recent loss and the unfamiliar surroundings. But even she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The air in the house felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. Objects would move inexplicably, a book misplaced, a chair slightly out of position. She found herself jumping at the slightest sound, her nerves stretched taut. As the days turned into weeks, the strange occurrences became more frequent, more brazen. One evening, while Sarah was preparing dinner, she heard Lily scream from upstairs. She raced up the steps, her heart pounding in her chest, to find Lily cowering in the corner of her room, her eyes wide with terror.
The shadows, they moved.
Sarah hugged Lily close, her own gaze darting around the room. There was nothing there, but the shadows cast by the setting sun seemed to writhe and twist, taking on sinister shapes. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Sarah's attempts to rationalize the events. She could no longer ignore the possibility that something was terribly wrong. The children were terrified, their once bright eyes now clouded with fear. She knew she had to do something.
We're going to figure out what's happening in this house.
The next morning, Sarah announced her decision. Her voice was firm, despite the tremor in her heart. The children looked at her, a flicker of hope replacing some of the fear in their eyes. Together, they would face whatever secrets the old house held. Their search led them to the attic, a dark and dusty space that had been locked since their arrival. The house had many rooms, each with its own story, but the attic was different. It was a place that seemed to hold the weight of forgotten memories and untold secrets. The air in the attic was thick with the smell of decay, and the silence was heavier, more oppressive than anywhere else in the house. It was as if the very walls were whispering tales of the past, tales that had been buried under layers of dust and neglect. As Sarah fumbled with the rusty lock, a sense of dread washed over her. She had heard stories about the attic, stories that spoke of strange noises and unexplained occurrences. Her heart pounded in her chest as she finally managed to turn the key. The old wooden door creaked open, revealing a space shrouded in shadows. The creaking sound echoed through the empty house, sending shivers down her spine. She hesitated for a moment, peering into the darkness before stepping inside. A single ray of sunlight pierced through a crack in the boarded-up window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The light seemed to bring a small measure of comfort, but it also highlighted the neglect and decay that had taken over the attic. And in the center of the room, partially hidden by the shadows, stood a figure. It was difficult to make out any details, but the presence was unmistakable. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing.
The figure seemed to be watching her, its eyes glinting in the dim light. She took a step closer, her curiosity battling with her fear. As she moved, the figure seemed to shift, almost as if it were beckoning her to come closer. The attic, once a place of dread, now felt like a gateway to something unknown, something that had been waiting for her all along.